Hello, I'm Scott Hargreaves, Executive Director at the Institute of Public Affairs. At this terrible time, our thoughts and prayers are first of all with the victims of the terrible massacre at Bondi Beach on Sunday, and of course their families and friends. More broadly, our hearts go out to the Jewish community in Australia and around the world, which has already had to endure so much and whose voices clearly have not been heard. At the moment, though, it behooves us to consider what should now be done. At the IPA, our core values include freedom, nationhood, and security, and all of those are affected by what happened at Bondi. There are deep questions to do with our future as a nation, but for the moment, there are very urgent ones to do with our national security that I wanted to touch on today. Some have described the events of Sunday, 14 December as a tragedy, but tragedy doesn't come close to capturing what happened. The word tragedy has a connotation of passivity to it, that something happened beyond the control of any human, like a natural disaster. But the deliberate, premeditated, cold-blooded slaughter of 15 men, women and children for extremist and religiously motivated reasons is no mere tragedy. It is a calculated act of Islamic terrorism, the permission structure for which was created by politicians who refused to address the reality of growing sectarian violence. Make no mistake, 1412 is Australia's 9/11. In the same way as those terrorist attacks against the United States forever changed that nation, so too has Australia now been forever changed by the massacre at Bondi. The Australia you and I grew up in is also a cultural fatality arising from this event. To put this in perspective, this is the second deadliest attack on Jewish communities outside Israel since World War II, with only the 1994 bombing in Buenos Aires leading to a greater loss of life. As someone who well remembers 9/11, when Osama bin Laden's men destroyed the World Trade Center in New York with the loss of 3,000 lives, I can say there is a key difference between then and now. On the same day as that attack, bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were identified as the perpetrators, and it was clear that it was an act of Islamist terrorism. The intelligence services were clear, governments around the world were clear, governments in Australia were clear, and indeed bin Laden himself was clear. He wanted the world to know what he'd done. Now, I worry that we are still seeing acts of militant Islamic terrorism, but we no longer have the clarity that we had back then. In the intervening 25 years, politicians have tied themselves in knots trying to avoid causing offence. And we have seen an increasing pattern of dissimulation, of avoidance, of euphemism and distraction. Bondi Beach is more than just another beach. Like the World Trade Center, it is a global icon. It is one of the most famous beaches in Australia and one of the most famous beaches in the world, just like the Sydney Opera House, the site chosen by extremists to celebrate the October 7 attacks on Israel, chosen because it is an icon. Bondi Beach encapsulates everything we cherish about our way of life. A laid-back leisure culture with people of different races and backgrounds intermingling in the surf and on the beach. In a word, egalitarianism. But on Sunday, Bondi Beach ceased to be a beach and became a battlefield. And indeed, while we say that our thoughts and prayers are steadfastly with Australia's Jewish community, it was not a group of Jews who were brutally attacked at Bondi. It was a group of Australians. And indeed, in that attack, Australia itself was attacked. When terrorists attack, it is by its very nature and intent an attack on our laws, our way of life and our liberal democracy. We call them terrorists because they are, after all, spreading terror. The unavoidable conclusion is that what in the early years of this millennium was called the war on terror did not ever end. It continues to this day. The people of Australia continue to be pitted against forces, both foreign and domestic, with proven linkages between the two. Now, over the past 48 hours, politicians have been busy condemning the events, as they should, vowing that it will never happen again, and saying that they will all act accordingly. All fine words, but words, for the moment, they remain. And these are words very similar to those that we have been hearing for many years now, without the situation improving in any way, shape or form. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that a further tightening of gun laws will be considered. Premier Minns, his government has also previously imposed tougher hate speech laws, which, as predicted, did precisely nothing to stop this attack. Of course, I understand the visceral reaction to extreme hate speech. Hate speech directed at any race or religion is hateful. But unfortunately, governments cannot legislate away hate. And as they seek to do so, they are more likely to legislate away our rights while distracting everybody from those whose intent is not speech, but murderous violence. What our political leaders have failed to understand is that the problem we face is not that there are some amongst us who preach hate, it is that there are some amongst us who both preach hate and believe that violence is the solution. We must confront the fact that there are too many against us who consider that political violence is the answer to the problems that they identify. It is true that some of these, as has been pointed out, are temporary migrants and could theoretically be deported, and that indeed should be done. But many are also naturalised citizens, or indeed were born here. So this is not a problem that will be solved through issuing press releases or passing new laws to stamp out hate. At one level, this attack could have been avoided if successive Australian governments and government officials had taken different decisions at different points in time. It could have been avoided through a better migration program where those with a predisposition to violence and terrorism were not allowed to enter in the first place. It is no knock on our intelligence agencies and law enforcement bodies to ask whether it could have been avoided through better law enforcement and national security arrangements and intelligence gathering. After an event of this magnitude, it is a government responsibility to ask that precise question, not for the sake of a witch hunt, but in order to identify what needs to change now to lessen the risk of further such disasters. It could have been avoided perhaps through political leaders who did not just recite cliches tested on focus groups, but instead focused on action. My fear is that we simply do not have the calibre of political leader who is equipped to deal with these problems. I appreciate the Prime Minister's empathy for the victims that he has expressed, and his words of consolation for the Australian Jewish community, but that is insufficient. He is not in office to be mourner-in-chief. He sits at the apex of our law enforcement, immigration and national security apparatus. I do appreciate that the National Security Committee of Cabinet has met, and indeed the National Cabinet also met. But the messages conveyed to the public since those meetings have done little to create confidence that steps are being taken to ensure an atrocity like this will not happen again. My concern is that if the Prime Minister cannot even mouth the words Islamic terrorism, then we cannot expect the various arms of government to address unflinchingly the real threats. By using evasions and dwelling on secondary issues, the Prime Minister and like-minded political leaders send a signal to government officials to undertake acts that are performative rather than substantial, when what we need is substantial measures to protect Australians. The Prime Minister spoke of an anti-Semitic terrorism incident, a phrase which captures the event by identifying the victims rather than the perpetrators. This is perverse. News reports indicated that inside the perpetrator's car, a flag of ISIS was found, the flag of an evil organisation that is more or less a successor to Al-Qaeda and which very recently ran a brutal state or proto-state in the Middle East, complete with slaves and the persecution of non-Muslim minorities such as the Yazidis. The plan by our government, such as it is, appears to be to prevent violent actions against Jews in future by eliminating the scourge of anti-Semitism, as if anti-Semitism alone is the driving factor in the choice to become a murderous terrorist, and or to pass further gun laws when our laws were already meant to be the gold standard. And Islamic terrorists, sadly, have proven they have many, many ways to inflict harm. For the moment, the only real bright spot in this dark tale are the heroic actions of Ahmed al-Ahmed, who tackled and disarmed one of the gunmen to save lives, regardless of the risk to his own. It was, of course, at Bondi Beach, where the world's first life-saving club was established in 1907 by volunteers who, in the spirit of self-sacrifice and mateship, wanted to help save their fellow countrymen from drowning in the surf. Mr. Ahmed's actions embody the best of this spirit and the best of us. Just 2 weeks ago, I hosted an IPA event in Melbourne and signed off, as I traditionally do at this time of year, with Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. In both the Christian and Jewish faiths, this is a time for joy and for family and friends. How terrible it is that these terrorists have deliberately sullied this special time. We can and should be grief-stricken. Nothing can soothe the ache in the hearts of the families of those killed, and nothing will bring back the Australia that we grew up in. But if politicians don't start to face the truth squarely now and take action, then they have failed the victims, failed Jews in Australia, and failed to protect our nation. Thank you.